since we've come to understand that Sharia, as a legal doctrine and system, is objective and knowable, certainly in the Muslim world, and we've also come to understand that it is an existential threat to our way of life. It calls for jihad. It calls for death to apostates. If a person wants to leave Islam, it is a capital crime. We've understood that if you blaspheme Muhammad, it is also a capital crime. Those are the laws applied in places like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, any place where Sharia exists. So if that is in fact the Sharia that is being applied in a state or federal court, then the answer has to be no. Sharia law should not apply here. That's no different from any other foreign law. Foreign laws that do not violate an individual's fundamental constitutional liberties, whether it's the state or federal constitution, should apply if it's appropriate. And it can be appropriate in several circumstances. If you get a foreign judgment and you want to come here and enforce that judgment, courts will generally enforce it, granted comity. If you have a contract that deals with foreign laws or an accident in a foreign country and you litigate in this country, the courts will quite rightly apply those foreign laws. And if you're involved in a contract dispute that requires litigation in a foreign country, or you get in an accident in a foreign country, courts in this country will quite rightly defer jurisdiction, they will not take the case, and have it litigated in the foreign country. However, there is a doctrine that all the courts apply at the federal level and in each of the states called void is against public policy. If those foreign laws, be they Sharia or the law of Timbuktu, violate fundamental public policy of the state or the federal government, then the courts will not apply it. Whether the parties agreed or not, the courts will simply refuse to apply it because it violates public policy. Now, what each of the courts have said is we need the legislature to tell us what public policy is. Because what we found, for example, in the area of Sharia, the Center for Security Policy, of which I am the general counsel, did a very important study where they examined all of the cases at the appellate level in the states that have published opinions where Sharia was raised as a defense or an offense or an aspect of the case. And we found that in 23 different states, the courts had applied at some level Sharia or rejected the application of Sharia. Unfortunately, without guidance from legislatures, the courts have gone back and forth. So sometimes they will look at Sharia and see that it is quite offensive to fundamental constitutional liberties, equal protection, due process, and have said, we're not going to apply Sharia. In other cases, the courts have ignored those threats. One of the more egregious cases occurred in Maryland, where a Pakistani woman had fled with her young son to avoid the oppressiveness of the Sharia system in Pakistan. The husband had obtained a divorce by simply announcing 3 times he wanted a divorce, a process not available to the woman under Sharia, and also obtained custody of the child in the Sharia court, primarily because the woman didn't show up to defend herself. When she argued her case in Maryland, because she initiated divorce proceedings and sought custody through the Maryland courts, she tried to explain to the Maryland courts that had she gone to Pakistan, now that she was living with another man, she would have been subject to capital punishment under Sharia for adultery. The Maryland Supreme Court, when it finally worked its way to the highest court of the state, understood the argument, accepted that that was in fact the case. The law of Pakistan included capital punishment for adultery, but because the court said we can't know that's going to happen to this woman, absolutely, we're going to ignore that. The end result was that this woman lost custody of her son. The courts applied Sharia through the jurisdiction of the Sharia courts. The state police power literally took her son away from her in Maryland based upon a Sharia law that would punish her with death for living with a man outside of a Sharia marriage. That is a wrong result that should have been corrected had the state had a bill or a legislation like our American laws for American courts.